I think what's coming to me from this is that Steve has a particular conception that was extremely important when the mass of the world's knowledge was in print, which is being able to do OCR effectively and getting good outputs. But now a lot of the knowledge that's being generated is being born digital. And so another part of the whole process is getting high quality born digital outputs. And when you think about it, there's stuff being generated, we don't know how to deal with it yet. But can we at least make sure it meets some quality standards so that when we're ready to deal with it, we've got a fighting chance? So in tech world, the classical example of this is, if your document is generated using LaTeX, make sure you archive everything so that you can regenerate the document using LaTeX, because when things improve later, you've got the best possible starting point. Don't throw anything away. That's surprisingly uncommon, but if we can make the case for that, then at least we've got large quantities of material that we might be able to deal with later. This reminds me of what were called, I think, the Verona intercepts, which were cryptography intercepts from the Americans of the Russians, and they were just stored until they could be decoded, and they were perhaps decoded 15 or 20 years later. But some of the information that came out was useful. Now, I'm not cryptography, and I don't like that particular sort of conflict-driven world, but the keeping of data in case it's useful, if it doesn't cost much to store, is a good principle. And that's also part of the pipeline. So the pipeline might be several years long. You know, a book is published and it becomes an important book, and 5 years later we want to make it accessible, or 5 years later we're able to make it accessible. At the same time, at the other end, there's I need to do something for this disabled student tomorrow or next week so they don't fall behind. I need to create my document in the special format, and I'm willing to make a bit of extra effort to do it. And we want to have tools that allow to do that. So I think that this is a situation where everybody is right, where every point of view is the correct point of view in some circumstances. And we need to cooperate without having to know too much about each other. If you have to know about everything about everybody to cooperate, it becomes impossible. I'll stop now because Jonathan's signalling.
Look, I really think you're right. If I was to look at the way publishers are representing their online presence for their journal articles. So if your university's got a subscription, you now look at the link and you go through your library to the journals page, and up pops an article in HTML from 20 years ago. And we know full well that 20 years ago, that publisher did not present that article in HTML. They presented it in print. And if they had an online presence 20 years ago, it was a PDF, possibly a scanned image of the PDF, courtesy of a photocopier. But because many publishers have been keeping their tech content, because the authors supplied their articles in tech according to the format, those journals are now presenting the same articles in an HTML context. And if publishers can do it for journal articles, then they can do it for books. It's not much different. Now, there are not many examples today where a publisher has actually made a book available in HTML. But that seems to me to be an exercise in willingness, not an exercise in capability. The tools that we need to take raw content and push them into a format that a blind student could use exist today for the most part. The problem we have is that not everyone who needs to do the processing knows how to use the tools that already exist. There are some examples where you don't get full access without some thought by the author or by someone else doing some editing, and description of charts is that one last major area where there is still absolutely almost always got to be a human involved in redescribing what the content of a graphic is. And there's some exceptions where it can be done by machine, but for the most part, it involves human intervention. But the rest of it, we actually have the tools available today. And it's, are we getting the right people who want to be helpful to use the tools that will create that access? And until that that process becomes the easiest thing to do, it will remain very, very hard for people to do. So the whole processing of a tech document today is most easily managed by the producer, which is usually the author, into a format that is not so easy for the end user who is blind, perfectly easy for the end user who is sighted. So doing the wrong thing for the blind student is unfortunately still the easiest thing for most people producing tech documents to do, because they don't have at their fingertips the immediacy of converting it to an accessible format that we need. It's not native. They have to go looking. They have to learn a different skill. And while it might not take too long actually to learn the skill, if they've used the right tech editor and know the right process or pipeline, if we want to use that expression, to get from raw tech into HTML, it can be done. And the problem is that we have to teach every author one by one by one around the tens of thousands of people creating content, because it's not so immediate and it's not so obvious. So I think that's, I'll end there for a moment. We'll come back, I'm sure.
I'll come in very briefly on that, and then Steve and Kelly, in whichever order, both put their hands up. When I write an email, I get these squiggles that say, your grammar's a bit funny, or this word isn't spelt correctly. And I get that feedback pretty instantaneously. Whereas when I'm writing a tech document, I get absolutely no feedback at any time that there's an accessibility problem looming.
But that's the choice of the editor you're using.
Well, yeah, okay, but that's my particular experience, and you're asking, Jonathan, that the authors of tech documents get very quick feedback regarding the accessibility of their documents.
The tools do exist to improve the situation, yes.
So let's make
the one exception is that in a tech space, you seldom get given the power or the opportunity to add in such things as the alternative text tag that is required for describing a graphic.
So part of the whole process is publicizing the tools that already exist and making them and putting them onto the desktop, into the IDE. Correct. I'm just repeating what you said, that's all.
Yep.
Let's have Steve and Kelly. Steve, no, Kelly. You're on, Kelly.
Okay, I have two comments. The first one being the little plug for R and Bookdown that has allowed people to publish their books that are also available in print and PDF to HTML using a single line of code within R, and it makes it an HTML book chapter with clickable links. And that's been really, really great for just information being accessible, but I'm not sure of the publishing rights between hosting something online and making it open source where you also have to pay for a PDF copy. That's way above my pay grade. I'm not sure the limitations on that. And then second, the other day, don't gasp, but I was using Word and to collaborate with some people. And I noticed down in the very bottom left-hand corner, they now have an icon that changes as you type and gives you immediate feedback on the accessibility of your document. I don't know how good it is, and I don't know what the options they have that are available as far as what it would actually say, but mine was just simple text, and so it always said, you know, completely accessible or whatever the catchphrase was. But there is immediate feedback in these Word documents where people can feel, I guess I felt good, like it was there and it's being recognized. I don't know how good it actually is as far as creating accessible content, but at least it's there.
Thank you for sharing that, Kelly. Would you like to put your hand down? Steve.
Kelly, that's the biggest dog I've ever seen. It almost looked like a horse. A couple of comments. Alt text was mentioned, and there are ways to generate alt text for equations, formulas, and so on. But that, to me, isn't really a solution for accessibility, because you want to provide the student the ability to explore an equation audibly the way that a sighted person might explore that equation visually. And it may be a very complex equation, and you may want to go to the middle and move up and move down and move left. So while alt text seems to some like a good solution for accessibility for math, we don't consider that a good alternative. It is something that could certainly be included, but I don't think that that solves the educational problem that exists. At one time, NASA the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in the US developed a tool called MathTrax that permitted you to enter an equation, and what it would do is automatically generate two sets of alt text. One would be visual and one would be mathematical. It would also plot the equation and then sonify it. So you could actually listen and explore. You might hear a sine wave, or you know, whatever the case may be. And I'm asking a question because I'm a dummy. Is there a way to represent charts and graphs, anything other than a photograph of an object, in LaTeX?
It's Jonathan here. Can I just say, the problem with mathematics and alt text is a solved problem as far as I'm concerned. We don't do alt text tags for any mathematical expressions anymore. That's a relic of the past, and that's the sort of thing that has been dramatically improved by publishers who have reprocessed their source files. So they may have put a graphic on a web page with an alt tag in the past, but those have, generally speaking, been totally removed. And I think the best example for having that happen at scale that was publicly available was Wikipedia, who did not re-enter anything about the source content for their pages, but reprocessed it so that instead of using the LaTeX as the text for the alt tag, they reprocessed it so that it was using a better mathematical renderer. So we had access to the equations, and we still do today. I think the problem with alt tags, generating alt tags now, is only for everything that is actually a figure, a graphic, whether it is a photo or a bar plot or a pie graph or anything you like. As long as it's a figure, it's all going to be treated the same way. Some intelligence has to be used to say, this is a photo that I can't do anything more than roughly tell you what's going on. And there's plenty of examples now we see where, social media, Facebook, even Microsoft's Word document is trying to give a description of a graphic somehow. But how do we get those graphics that truly contain information, such as the graphs in a statistical sense, network representations, flow charts, and the like? Those scientific, informative graphics in a science sense, we don't have a natural pipeline for most of those different options. So I think we've still got a long way to go in processing those things. I'd point out that the idea that Kelly brought up about the R world using Bookdown, and I use it myself, Kelly. We still have students who demand the PDF, even though I am creating HTML for everybody. And it's achievable. It's not too hard, but I don't know why anyone wants it. But the requester is allowed to ask, and it can be given. The publishing aspect of most people writing books in that community is that the publishers no longer make a lot of money out of books. The authors don't get paid a lot of money to write a book, anything like what we used to in the past with royalties. There's so many books being authored, and only a few of them, in a very small proportion sense, actually get to the point of having enough royalties to make royalties a viable proposition. So the online presence of many of these books is actually an updated version of the dead tree that people could buy, or even the original digital edition, which is just a visual representation of the dead tree. Whereas the online presence of many of these works is a living document that is being updated all the time. And those Bookdown projects have actually been one of the greatest opportunities for access for blind people wanting to do anything statistical in the last 5 years. The efforts have been quite massive. The range of information that is available today is now in the hundreds to thousands territory of books that are accessible, with the authors doing absolutely nothing to make them accessible. They're not doing anything special at all. They're just doing what everybody does in Bookdown. And the principal person responsible for Bookdown was a guest for the Tech Hour when I joined last time, which was Ihui Xia. Now, Ihui knows a little bit about the needs for access, but he's not an accessibility expert at all. And that's the key. He's developed a tool where everyone just does it without having to know anything about access. And they're using a tool that creates accessible content totally unwittingly and publishing it on the web in a form that is easily digestible compared to the dead trees or the PDF, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'd like to